Hello and welcome to the Immuno-Oncology webinar. This is in fact the second in the series of three. The first session was Immuno or Bust, is Immuno-Oncology a Bubble, which was broadcast on the 12th of November. That one actually looked at all the excitement around the investment and actually sort of questioned whether or not it was a sustainable trend that we were seeing or a fad. That is available for people to look at. Today's topic is different routes to the same destination, examining competitive strategy and assessing likely winners and losers. As in the previous webinar, what you're going to hear is going to be underpinned by the reporting from our teams of experienced journalists in our insight products, most notably Script Intelligence, Pink Sheet and In Vivo, plus data and analyses from our expert analysts in Data Monitor Healthcare, BioMedTracker, MedTrack, and Citeline's Trial Trove, Site Trove, and Pharma projects. I'd like to thank everyone for taking their time to join us in today's webinar, and also thank Conic, our sponsor for this webinar. Before we get started, I want to review a few housekeeping items and let you know how to actually participate in today's webinar. First, you should have a control panel on the right side of your screen. Towards the bottom of the control panel is the Q&A pane. You may submit questions or comments in writing using the Q&A panel during the presentation. All answers to your questions will be answered after the webinar by email. Today's webinar is actually being recorded, and everyone will receive an email with a link to view the recording of today's event. So let's get started. My name is Mike Ward, and I'm the Global Director of Content for Informa Pharma industry-facing new analysis products. My panelists today are Alex Shimmings, who's Managing Editor at Script Intelligence, Thomas Sturzaker, who's Principal Drugs Analyst for Pharma Projects, and Colin White, who's the Lead Analyst in Oncology for Data Monitor Healthcare. I personally have been commentating on the pharma and biotech industries for more than 30 years, writing for all the leading pharma business titles, co-authoring industry reports on behalf of professional services companies such as Deloitte and Ernst & Young, and as well for a stint for my sins, I actually was also head of research teams in a couple of investment banks. Alex Shimmings is the Managing Editor of Script Intelligence. Her main focus is on pharmaceutical and biotech R&D, including clinical trials news and preclinical science. Alex started her career at Script as a junior science reporter 17 years ago. Thomas Sturzaker is the Principal Drugs Analyst for Pharma Projects, focusing these days in the oncology area in particular. Thomas has been in the pharma competitive intelligence space for 10 years, covering all aspects of pharma R&D in that time. Colin White has been the lead oncology analyst overseeing Data Monitor Healthcare's oncology coverage for the past 3 years. Before joining Informa as an analyst in 2009, Colin was a chemist who earned a PhD from the University of Missouri before working as a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Maryland. So in today's discussion, what we're going to be looking at is a number of issues. 1, what is all the fuss about? 2, who is in the lead? 3, what strategies and what deals are people doing? What clinical development strategies are being implemented? And finally, if you're late to the game, what should you be doing? So let's start off with what is the fuss all about? So what's really interesting about this whole space, 10 years ago, the idea of using boosting the immune system to actually treat cancer was just a pipe dream. Whereas now, as we can sort of see from this graph here, actually it's a reality. This here shows the increased number of drugs actually in the immunotherapy space, going from absolutely nowhere 20 years ago to over 400 now in this year.
I think what's interesting about this graph is almost looking like exponential growth, and we've plotted that out to 2016, which is based on estimates. But how much further, how high is that line going to go? Or is it going to plateau?
Right. So okay. So if we go to the next slide. So again, what we actually sort of see now, what we're going to do both in terms of the trials and also looking at the deals, we're going to go into a little bit more detail later on. But again, what we can see here is a sort of a similar pattern for immunotherapy deals. Now, this is actually just by the number of deals rather than necessarily the value, because in fact, I think what we would see if we plotted out the value is we'd actually sort of see some big upfronts and some big ticket deals. And again, we're going to be able to sort of focus that on a little bit later. And again, one of the interesting things is we've already had some drugs approved or in very late stage, but already it's not just around monotherapies, but actually we're seeing a huge number of combinations taking place. And again, what we're going to do is we're going to go into a little bit more detail about what these do.
So what we've shown here is some of the leading PD-1 inhibitors, PD-1, PD-L1 inhibitors, and a variety of the other targets which they're in development in combination with. You see interesting targets like IDO, where all of them are in development with that, and also CTLA4 and CSF1R. The purpose of this slide is to show that these PD-1 inhibitors, which is commercially going to be the most successful class in the immuno-oncology space, right now, as we'll show in a second, we've got approvals for some monotherapies, but over the next few years, it's going to be increasingly important what these PD-1 and PD-L1 inhibitors are combined with. And what we wanted to show here is that the leaders of the pack right now, there's a lot of development activity going on around combining them with other immuno-oncology agents that target a variety of receptors.
Yeah, thanks so much, Colin. So, I mean, what we're going to do is to say we're going to, again, sort of drill a bit further deeper later on in this webinar. So this is from a report that, in fact, that Colin authored earlier in the summer around the sort of immuno-oncology space. Do you want to discuss this?
Yes, this is a simple graphic showing a tumor cell, and it shows some cells from the innate immune system and T cells from the adaptive immune system. And in between the cells, you see that there are receptor-ligand interactions. A lot of the targets that companies are looking at look at these receptor-ligand interactions between these cells involved in an immune response to a tumor cell. And depending on the ligand and the receptor, these interactions can either boost an immune response, enhance an immune response, or they can inhibit an immune response. And so there's a few targets there selected, but that is what a lot of the development is involved in looking at.
Great, great. Thanks very much. So, and then again, this here is a graphic which kind of shows some of the sort of the leading players and which targets they're going for.
Yeah, so again, as I mentioned before, the most commercially successful class is going to be PD-1 or PD-L1 inhibitors. Essentially, this target, tumor cells overexpress PD-L1 as a way of evading the immune system response against the tumor. When this interaction between PD-L1 and the PD-1 on the T cell takes place, the immune response is subdued and they hide from the immune response. So what's happened in recent years is there's been a number of drugs developed which inhibit this interaction, and when they inhibit that interaction, it then stops the tumor from being able to hide from the immune system. And what's particularly interesting about these and why they're being looked at in a number of combinations is because if previously there's been things which can boost the immune response, like cancer vaccines and things, and they've not been that successful because the tumor has these evasion mechanisms. What's good about PD-1, PD-L1 inhibitors is that they prevent the tumor from hiding. So you can logically see that if you combine it with something that boosts the immune system, then the tumor is no longer able to hide, and your immune system is more effectively able to kill the tumor cells.
And I think another interesting point there is that so far, at least, there doesn't seem to be much difference in the efficacy of either strategy, either attacking the PD-1 or its ligand. So it's a two-pronged attack for the companies to actually go after there.
I mean, do you have any comment on that, Colin? I mean, about the sort of difference between the two approaches?
Yes, the leading drugs which have gained approvals that you see in the moment, Opdivo and Keytruda, are PD-1 inhibitors. The next wave of ones which will get approval, such as Roche's atezolizumab, that's like SRG7446, and AstraZeneca's durvalumab, which is MEDI7436. Those are PD-L1. You know, there isn't enough data to suggest which is the superior approach, or if there is an advantage to the approaches. There's some thought that the PD-L1s may be slightly more conducive to combining with different immuno-oncology agents, but the data is really not there to fully support that yet, so it's not known which is the best approach as yet.
So when will we get sort of the sort of transparency on that?
Over the next few years, really, as more data emerges for combinations. So far, there's only really comprehensive data for one immuno-oncology combination, and that is the combination between Bristol Myers Squibb Opdivo and Bristol Myers Squibb's Yervoy, which is a CTLA-4 inhibitor, both checkpoint inhibitors, and that data, that combination is approved in melanoma, and the data from the CheckMate 66 trial was, it's had really good data in advanced melanoma, and so far that's one combination. But over the next few years, we're going to see more and more data start to emerge for all the different combinations that are in development for atezolizumab, for durvalumab, and although they're not being compared directly head to head, you will start to be able to get more of an idea as to whether there is any real difference between combinations with a PD-1 inhibitor or combinations with a PD-L1 inhibitor.
So there's still potential for those who've gone for the PD-L1 inhibitors to kind of catch up in the combination space then?
Yes, very much so.
If it proves that it is a better combo?
Yes. Yes.
But the jury's very much still out on that.
So of course, this is in fact, one of the killer questions that I'm sure the audience is actually dying to hear our opinions. Already, Colin, you mentioned about sort of PD-1s, PD-L1s being sort of the leaders and the ones that you're anticipating going forward. But actually, in your opinion, who is in the lead at the moment?
Yes, so I think it's very clear at the moment who's in the lead. The number one in the lead is Opdivo from Bristol Myers Squibb. You see from this slide, it's had a number of approvals in Japan, EU, the US. Initially approved for melanoma in the US in December 2014. Recently also approved, as I mentioned, in combination with Yervoy first line, and first line in the US in November 2015. It's approved second line in non-small cell lung cancer from the data from CheckMate 17, CheckMate 57 trial is also for squamous non-small cell lung cancer, and then also non-squamous non-small cell lung cancer now, so second line approval, and just recently also now approved for a third type of cancer, a third disease, renal cell carcinoma, where it's approved second line, and that was because it showed a significant overall survival advantage in comparison to Afinitor, which is the standard of care in the second line. Well, you can see from the sales information available, so sales for the first 9 months of 2015, worldwide sales of $467 million. Most of that coming from the US, as you might expect, where it's got the most approvals so far. And we predicted Opdivo to do very well, and it's doing well. It's doing very well, and its sales are only going to increase as it gains more and more approvals. It's currently in phase 3 development for brain cancer, head and neck cancer, small cell lung cancer, and for brain cancer, head and neck cancer, and small cell lung cancer, all those phase 2 trials are expected to be completed in 2017 and 2018. And so one of the great advantages of PD-1 inhibitors is that they work across a variety of different, the mechanism of action is applicable across a variety of tumor types.
So 467 million. You sort of said that you were predicting it was going to be good sales. So is that kind of the ballpark that you were thinking? And how big could this product grow?
Yes, I mean this product we predict rapid indication expansion over the next few years, and in a variety of different things. We predict well in excess of $4 billion a year by 2020. So various estimates that there are various. That's a conservative estimate. Various estimates, go up, beyond 12 billion a year and things like that. But a conservative estimate, would suggest it's definitely going to be a multi-billion-dollar drug.
But that conservative element is, or estimate is around still having combos.
That conservative estimate is based on very specifically looking at just the specific indications for which it's in development, and it's not really factoring in a lot of the off-label use which will happen with it. So its sales are only going to grow.
But it has just had a little bit of a check to its march forward, hasn't it, with that complete response letter?
Yes, it's had a complete response letter from the FDA just recently for its approval for BRAF mutation positive patients in metastatic melanoma, where they wanted to see more evidence of its efficacy. The thing about that was that it was approved for melanoma on the basis of data from the CheckMate 66 trial, but what the FDA wanted to see was specifically more evidence in BRAF V600 positive patients, and the reason for that is because there are a number of very good treatments available for BRAF,
the combo
specifically targeted for BRAF V600 mutation. And so I think that the FDA clearly wants to get a better idea of exactly what the efficacy is of this drug in that specific population.
Is that because of the MEK inhibitors in the BRAF?
Yes, there's combinations now approved with the BRAF and MEK inhibitors.
But that was slightly different from the other agencies, wasn't it? Didn't the EU one?
Yeah,
slightly broader.
You see, it's got broader approvals for first line in Japan and in the EU.
So it's interesting that the FDA have got a little bit more cautious though.
Yes, and I think they just want to see more evidence of efficacy where there are already a number of very good treatment options available.
So Opdivo got the first set of approvals. It's got the most approvals at the moment, but they did have a fast follower.
Yes, and so the other leading drug at the moment is Merck & Co.'s Keytruda, already approved, as you can see, for melanoma, and again in the second line for non-small cell lung cancer. Keytruda is in phase 3 development for gastric cancer, bladder cancer, breast cancer, multiple myeloma, head and neck cancer, and so it has a number of indications for which it's in development. And Keytruda was also approved in October this year in combination with the first companion diagnostic for PD-L1, so specifically identifying patients that are PD-L1 positive and using Keytruda to treat those patients.
Isn't that a slightly contentious area though, the PD-L1 as use as biomarker?
What the clinical data has shown is that PD-L1 is correlated very definitely with the response. With patients respond to treatment if they're PD-L1 positive and they're treated with PD-1 or PD-L1 inhibitor. What it is with PD-L1 is that PD-L1 is inducible, and so as opposed to a molecular alteration such as BRAF or HER2, where it's pretty stable in the sample, it's pretty stable, it's going to be there. With PD-L1, it depends when you took this sample, how long it's been in storage, where from the tumour you took the sample. These can vary, and so although when a patient has been identified as PD-L1 positive, you can fairly confidently say they will respond to the treatment. It's not the greatest biomarker for identifying all the patients. You'll get patients who are classed as PD-L1 negative who also have a good response, and so it's not the best biomarker for selecting the patients.
Right. Okay. And so the 352 million okay, in the first 9 months. Is that just because it's only in 3 indications at the moment, and it's a bit slower in its approvals than the Opdivo? I mean, do you expect Keytruda to beat Opdivo?
No, in terms of the first drugs on the market, I expect Opdivo to be ahead, but I expect Keytruda to be slightly behind. They're engaged, the two front runners are engaged as a race for approvals in various indications, and I expect Keytruda to, as it gains approval in some of these indications, first, which I mentioned, like perhaps in multiple myeloma and other ones, where, significantly boosted. But over the two of them, I expect both of them to do extremely well, both of them to, earn multiple billions per year. But looking at the two things, we have Opdivo as being earning slightly more, and Keytruda are in the second position.
Right, okay. So I'm going to bring Thomas in here because, I mean, what's really interesting, I mean, you've already mentioned it, Colin, about the fact that these products are already in a lot of different other cancers. But Thomas, this is some data that you guys have pulled together, which actually shows the sort of development status of these immunotherapies in a lot of different oncology indications.
Yeah, that's right. So, Colin mentioned some of these, talking about the products in particular, and it's quite a kind of busy table, but that's only a reflection of, as we've discussed, how kind of not just active these companies are in these particular 5 antibodies that we're looking at specifically, but it shows this sort of broad range of cancer types that we're seeing the potential in here, and also, of course, the gaps in the coverage, theoretically from one drug to the other, and where they might be able to move in. So Keytruda is obviously ahead of Opdivo in their breast cancer there, which is a sizable market, and then Astazolimab as well is in phase 3 in those, even though they've lagged behind in terms of the lead indications of melanoma, non-small cell lung, and of course, as Colin said, the recent approval in renal cell as well.
Was that a strategy, do you think, that atezolizumab has just thought melanoma, it's still very early stage, whereas it's phase 3 in bladder cancer, breast cancer, ones that the two leaders are a little bit further behind? That's the strategy that they've taken.
Yes, well, I think that atezolizumab has a good chance of catching up with Opdivo and Keytruda quite a bit by the strategy they've employed, which is for non-small cell lung cancer, for example. You saw that Opdivo and Keytruda are both approved second line. Data that emerged at the European Cancer Congress this year they were showing non-small cell lung cancer from the Poplar and Birch trials, and the Birch trial in the first line patients, the overall response rates were very good for atezolizumab, and it could well get approval straight in first line for non-small cell lung cancer.
Actually leapfrogging the front runners.
Yeah, leapfrogging the front runners to the most lucrative first line treatment setting. In bladder cancer, atezolizumab, Keytruda is also in development, but actually atezolizumab could be the first PD1, PD-L1 inhibitor approved for bladder cancer based on data that they presented from the IMvigor 210 trial. There are not very good treatment options at all for bladder cancer, so the overall response rates that were achieved in this trial in PD-L1 positive patients, it's vastly better than what's currently available.
I mean, do we have a sort of sense of why that there are some big gaps in this, where clearly the companies have made a conscious choice not to go into a particular indication? Or is it just in terms of bandwidth that they've got in terms of either making product or actually being able to recruit patients?
I mean, I would expect that, yeah, it's probably a strategic move in that sense. As Colin said, looking for that big first line approval and then perhaps expanding into the other indications. I mean, you can see there, of course, Opdivo is representing the most there. I mean, the table is kind of organized around that, so it gives that impression. But equally, they're showing more indications, and that may well be, with those 3 approvals under their belt already, they're feeling confident to then go and target those smaller but still, potentially very lucrative diseases.
This one's the greatest unmet need is going to help with reimbursement. That could be another strategy that companies are following.
And another thing which affects us, of course, is that just Opdivo and Keytruda being ahead, and the others that are slightly behind, atezolizumab, durvalumab, evolumab, having to carefully select where they go, what they develop, where they focus their development, in light of the fact that they're coming onto the market behind.
Yeah, because I guess they're going to have to try and convince oncologists to switch from one to another. I mean, what would they have to do to be able to actually persuade oncologists to do that?
I mean, it's going to be in the absence of head-to-head evidence, and so it's wherever they can potentially show efficacy advantage around that, and that's why as we move forward, the combinations becomes increasingly into play, because if you have a nice combination that works well, has good toxicity profile, and is achieving, you've got good clinical data that shows that your combination is more effective than Opdivo monotherapy in one of these things, then that's how you can effectively challenge them.
So is that one way how these major players, or anybody actually in this space, is going to be able to differentiate themselves from the crowd?
Yes, definitely one of the ways.
So I mean, this sort of nicely segues into so what are the strategies that people are actually engaged in? And we talked about also the combos. Some of these, although the first combo that we sort of came across was in fact a Bristol Myers compound with another Bristol Myers drug. What we're actually sort of seeing is we're seeing a lot of deals being done. So I mean, here, for example, is just in the last 15, 18 months, sort of big deals. And you still see the value of some of these deals, the buyer dollar values are absolutely huge. And what's interesting, in many of the cases, it's a pharma player with a biotech. So is this a way for sort of the biotechs to actually sort of grow and become big players themselves?
I think it's the only way, isn't it, really? They've got to get something that's unique, that's effective. They've got to get really solid early data package to it to be able to show the bigger companies. And if they get that right, then they're going to get the money in, aren't they?
Yeah. So, I mean, do we sort of get a sense? I mean, we look at that deal, the Pfizer Selectis deal, which kind of knocked everybody's socks off, 2.9 billion. I mean, that seems. I mean, I know a lot of it's going to be backloaded, but that seems to be a big bet. I mean, was this how Pfizer was going to try and catch up?
Well, one of the interesting things about this deal, of course, is that Selectis is, investigating allogeneic CAR T cell therapy. And we haven't spoken much about CAR Ts yet, but essentially it's chimeric antigen receptor T cells, and aside from PD-1s, it's the other area of high interest within the immuno-oncology field. There's a number of companies, Novartis, Juno, Kite, all involved in what's called autologous CAR T cell therapy.
And that's where you get it out from the patient themselves, and then you play around with it, and then you put it back in.
Yeah, exactly. You take it out, engineer the T cells so that they're able to recognize the cancer cells and destroy them. We've seen very good data, early data in hematological malignancies for CD19 targeted CAR T cells therapy. There's been a huge amount of interest in a huge amount of investment in the companies, and the value of some of these companies like Juno has soared. And what's interesting is that we saw just a few weeks ago that there was tremendous excitement over a single patient being tested with Selectis' off-the-shelf allogeneic CAR T cell therapy, which where they didn't need to take the T cells from the donor. They were able to use cells from another donor, and the implications with that were, first of all, to put in perspective, is one patient, and so it's not evidence. It's not true evidence. That has yet to be seen. But it was encouraging results in one patient, and why it sparked a lot of interest was because before the autologous CAR T cells have even launched, if Selectis' approach, allogeneic approach, is scientifically possible, then it renders those other approaches, it could render those other approaches obsolete because it would have a much lower manufacturing cost.
Yeah, I mean, it's a holy grail, obviously.
Yes.
The other question is, though, is like, is it going to be as effective as the CAR T ones can be, and how much lower an efficacy rate can we go before it's not worth it? But I suppose there's more detail coming out at ASH this weekend about that product, isn't there? But at the moment, it seems like it could be a complete broadside to all the other CAR T companies, and must be keeping them up at night, I think.
So, I mean, how do you actually feel? I mean, it's the holy grail. How skeptical are you? I mean, cause, you know, at the moment it's N equals 1. How excited or not are you about this?
Well, as I said, there's a lot more data coming out about the various approaches at ASH, and there was even an announcement, you know, from Kite has just entered into a deal with GE to look at the manufacturing and see if they could get the manufacturing costs and approach to be much better for the autologous approach that they've been developing. There's a lot that needs to be figured out, but I think primarily what needs to be figured out is actually the efficacy of the allogeneic CAR Ts, and when they're given to a number of patients, and when you can look at the response and the duration of the response, and whether the responses, whether they are as effective as the autologous approach. But if they are, and they are able to do it like that, then it's commercially going to look like a great deal at 2.9 billion.
Yeah. And of course, I mean, what's interesting is that the Merck deal.
Yes, I was just going to say they have gone the more traditional route by licensing in a PDL1, so that they have one in their stable. So that was a big deal as well. I think it was slightly lower up front, 850 million, but up to 2 billion in regulatory milestones for that deal.
But 800 million plus is a big upfront. I remember, you know, Catherine Pickering, you know, she was talking about it, well, back at JP Morgan, beginning of the year, and this clearly got everybody excited, and it allowed Merck Serono, I guess, or Merck as they are now rebranded, to get some real skin in the game. And you know, your judging panel, Scrip Awards, gave it the deal of the year.
Yes, they were very impressed with that deal. But it's interesting what Pfizer have done is that they were a bit late in the whole PD-1 game, but they've gone in hard, but they've also got other in-house immuno-oncology products, you know, against other targets further back in development. So now they've got something to test it with. Particularly, they've got products targeting OX40 and I think CCR2. So that gives them the key to go in with these combination therapies. And then on the side, they've got the Selectis UCART19 bet going on as well. So although they were a bit late, I think they're in an interesting position.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting about this, again, with the big deals, is we've got Bristol Myers. So although they're in sort of pole position, they actually have been putting some big bucks behind some deals.
Well, what's happened is that I'd say that Roche and AstraZeneca have really got, really done a lot in looking at combinations of their drugs, and long term, they're looking at a wide variety of combinations, and they're, potentially that represents the biggest potential threat to Opdivo monotherapy. So what you have here is two big deals, one for CSF1R, and one for IDO. As you saw earlier, there's a significant amount of people looking at the IDO target. It's indolamine dioxygenase. It's an enzyme which catalyzes the oxidative cleavage of tryptophan. Tryptophan is necessary when you're getting an immune response when your T cells responded. The tryptophan is necessary for proliferation and cell survival. And so by inhibiting IDO, when the IDO enzyme is present, as overexpressed around a lot of tumors, it lowers the available amount of tryptophan. So by blocking this, by looking at IDO inhibitors, you can make sure that there's enough tryptophan available, and essentially the end result is that you get a boost to the immune response, you get a better immune response. So you can see the sense in combining drugs such as this, where you're getting a boosted immune response, plus the tumour can no longer hide from it because you're combining it with Opdivo.
Yeah. And again, we see Juno. Of course, Juno is kind of like one of the poster child or children of the immuno-onc space, particularly in biotech. Sort of came away from nowhere, and in recent years has done some big financings, done big.
Big IPO, 265 million. But just for a second, just going back to Roche's atezolizumab. I mean, again, from the previous slides that we've shown, it was clear that that product was in a lot of trials in combination with a lot of other different IO targets, but also in a lot of trials in different types of cancer. So there's a real aggressive program going on there by Roche.
Yes.
And I think some analysts think it could be primed for good things in the future.
So, I mean, your colleagues, right, in the sort of script intelligence pink sheet, what the pharmaceutical executives been sort of saying about this space? I mean, if we look at some of the other sort of major players, I mean, are there?
Yeah, I mean, we talk to execs all the time, but about their strategies really. We're talking to Boehringer Ingelheim, for instance, recently. They freely admit they're late to the game with the whole PDL1, but interestingly, they still believe that they need their own PD-1 product, and they do have one in-house. But they're working hard on the combinations with things like ICOS, LAG3, etc. But what their rationale is that you want one product, as Colin was saying before, to kind of release the brake on the immune system response to the tumour, and another one that actually steps on the pedal. So you've got this almost not quite a two-pronged approach, but a dual approach to targeting the tumour. But again, like a lot of companies, questions are what do you combine with what, and how and which indications do you go for. It's a huge matrix of possibilities, and you've basically got to look at the science, get to proof of concept. Having to do. Another thing that Boehringer Ingelheim are very keen on doing is combining with their cancer vaccines. And as I think, Colin, you were talking before about how the PD-L1s could really help the cancer vaccines, which till recently have been a bit disappointing in how they've gone. But these new PD-1s can really save that cancer vaccine class by a combined approach. And so that's something that Boehringer Ingelheim are very interested in doing.
One thing I wanted to say about this slide is I know we're going to discuss further, later on we're going to discuss in some more detail different strategies that the different companies are doing. But on this slide you can see here like Sanofi and Regeneron. That deal is interesting because one of the strategies, if you're coming now when you're late, is to just to believe that there is going to be enough room in the market for more PD-1s and to just develop them, and so that's what they're doing. And then another thing, if you were late getting involved with either PD-1s or CAR-Ts, if you were late getting involved with either of them, an interesting strategy is to then just make sure you're involved by doing big money deals. And that's why Celgene and the Juno deal is, they weren't involved in CAR-T, but they now have a stake in it via this deal. And they also have a stake in PD-1 because they've done a large deal with AstraZeneca for MEDI4736, their durvalumab, in hematological malignancies. So in blood cancers where Celgene has a lot of expertise and a lot of experience, they now can combine durvalumab with the variety of their treatments, like their treatments for multiple myeloma and other things. And so, as another strategy is, just get involved with big money deals.
So, I mean, actually, and coming back to the CAR-T and where you were talking about effectively sorting out the manufacturing, I seem to recall that Novartis bought the old Dendrion manufacturing facility to enable them to actually improve their own ability in that cell therapy space.
Another nice thing in Regeneron, they've got a PD-1 inhibitor, but they're thinking, as Colin said, that the field is in its very early days. There's still plenty to play for, and it doesn't matter that we're a bit further behind the eye. But GlaxoSmithKline, in contrast, they're completely behind, and they've decided to go to. Yeah, they're going straight to the next generation checkpoint inhibitors, mainly the OX40 agonists, and they've also got first-in-class ICOS agonist, which is GSK 3359609. But it's an interesting approach to sort of bypass the whole PD-1.
Okay, so if we actually now look at sort of the sort of clinical development strategies that are actually being implemented, and this sort of gives us an opportunity to again interrogate our sightline assets, looking at what we've got in pharma projects, trial trove and site trove.
Yeah, thanks Mike. So we did look there at some quite specific products and deals, and as you say, what we thought we'd do is take a look at our quite large data sets that we have regarding the industry as a whole to kind of get some big picture graphics to kind of show what's going on there. So again, this is very similar to that first graph we see, the kind of the immunotherapies almost exponentially rising, and here we're breaking it down more by phase to see where that kind of growth is coming, and is it sustainable growth. And I think an interesting thing about this graph is it does show not just the huge increase in preclinical, which of course we'd expect, drugs are starting in preclinical, and companies are quite keen to publicize that maybe more than they would be normally, but that is actually filtering through as well to the clinical stages in a very kind of natural and sort of healthy way. And similarly, we talked about some of these specific mechanisms, and this is by no means all of the mechanisms, but these are just looking at the top ones. And we can see PD-1, PD-L1 obviously dominating, and we've talked about IDO coming in fourth there. CD19 and CD20 both very high in that chart. Several antibodies looking at that, but also of course, as we've mentioned, and we'll talk about a bit more later, the cell therapy is very much targeted towards that. And all of these are potentially synergistic in combination as well. So there's really a really broad array of mechanisms and approaches that can be used here. So this is a closer look at the kind of diseases. So we had a graph for those big 5 antibodies, and again, this is now looking at the whole field. So where's that distribution falling? Again, the preclinical drugs obviously are slightly skewing the unspecified cancers to the left there. But we can see melanoma and non-small cell lung still really, really popular, even with those leaders, occupying the market as we speak. What's quite interesting as well here is we're seeing the hematological cancers very well represented. Non-Hodgkin's actually, second in terms of the identified cancers, and almost half of the diseases listed here are in fact blood rather than solid tumours. So again, potentially a large piece of the pie still yet to be claimed.
So so looking at that, Colin, for example, is that something that you would have expected to see, and how, as we go forward, will that graph, do you think, develop?
Yes, you would expect this graph to be like this, because the first target being melanoma is no surprise because of its immunogenicity. It's known to respond well. It was one of the tumour types that people who are developing immunotherapies would focus on, and so it's also got the first approvals in that, and so there's evidence that these drugs work there. So you see why that's a focus for development. What was really interesting was when the data started to emerge for non-small cell lung cancer, because when that came out, it really showed that these drugs would work across a wide variety of tumour types, and there was a lot of excitement. With some of the other ones which are high up, when you see hematological malignancy, that's the focus of a lot of the CAR T development, but also with PD-1s and the combinations.
So if one looks at this, there seems to be quite a lot of compounds being developed for these cancers. How's that going to pan out commercially? We're going to end up with lots and lots of options, and therefore it's going to be everything's going to be on price, and people are actually going to go for compete on price, or are they going to still be able to compete on efficacy? Because we've already said that actually there doesn't seem to be a lot of difference between some of these products anyway.
Well, I think certainly as this is just an emerging field, just a starting field, there's a lot of rewards up for grabs in terms of, with monotherapies, just getting to an indication first and providing for a better treatment option for a wide variety of tumor types. And then with the combinations, in a lot of cases, these combinations could be the first combination to have like a significant improvement in efficacy and a lot of commercial reward until people can catch up and experiment, do the research into other combinations or other options, and so that's why there's such intense activity.
But again, so thinking about commercially, is this going to bust, health insurance companies and healthcare systems? Colin shrugs his shoulders. These will be these will be expensive treatments. There's no doubt about that. But I think that they will still be reimbursed because of the significant improvement, and reimbursement will not be an issue for many of them because of that. But in the longer term, obviously, just in general with expensive treatments in countries like the US, there may be some pushback from payers over, especially with some of these combinations, if they're consistently costing so much that it starts to become a burden. But one of the other things to consider is that for some of these drugs are for very rare conditions, like Pfizer and Merck KGaA's drug avelumab has fast-track designation for Merkel cell carcinoma, for example, where it will be an expensive treatment, but there's not that many patients for that. And they're the only ones in it because they've got orphan status. They have exclusivity on that.
I think also it depends on what the absolute efficacy of these products are going to be. I mean, obviously Gilead has made a fortune by essentially being able to cure Hep C, and therefore they could command a high price, and they have experienced a lot of pushback. So it could be a balance of how long patients are going to survive.
Yeah, and so moving on again to we're looking at the types of therapies now. Obviously, this is kind of reflecting what we've spoken about, showing why the biotechs are really shining in this field. We could sort of divide this into three. We see that antibodies and cellular therapies, taking almost 2/3 of this themselves, and other biologicals and chemicals, of course, really being pushed out into the sidelines here. So CAR-T, obviously the most popular within the cellular category, and Novartis CTL19 or tisugemla Trusil T is the one to watch there, being as it is the only one in phase 3 at the moment, and that's in leukemia and lymphoma. And, we'd expect to, again, we've mentioned ASH, to see some data coming from that.
Are we surprised though that cancer drugs that are already in existence, sort of chemical compounds, have got such a small proportion, and yet the CAR-Ts, which is still kind of still speculative, actually is taking such a large part of the pie? I mean, is that not a surprising thing? I mean, is there not a role for the existing sort of cancer compounds in combos?
I mean, I think there may be a role, yeah, but it would probably be only in terms of as a combination therapy, and it seems the antibodies. Obviously, we're looking at very specific targets here, so antibodies are going to be the kind of go-to for many companies in that field.
I think honestly they are looking at chemo combinations with immuno-oncology drugs, but I think there's, Colin will be able to correct me if I'm wrong, there's some worry that the chemo would actually adversely affect the response that you're trying to get from the immuno-oncology agent.
That is the case in some things, but there is one of the things I haven't discussed, or we haven't discussed, is there's also, I focused in on the combinations with other immuno-oncology agents. There is, of course, a lot of investigation into how these drugs work with existing therapies in a number of indications. If you look at them, there's trials going on, for example, with atezolizumab and erlotinib in non-small cell lung cancer, and so seeing how in EGFR mutation positive patients in non-small cell lung cancer, how well these combine, and that's just one example, but they could potentially combine well with a number of different existing treatment options.
Yeah, and I think we saw, didn't we, elotuzumab was just approved the other day in combination with Revlimid and dexamethasone, so in some ways, that's going to kind of a sign of things to come. So yeah, moving on to this, so again, talking big picture, this is the biggest picture we can look at. We're looking at geographical kind of trial and investigator activity within this, and as expected, we see both the EU and the US dominant. Curious enough, almost exactly the same number of trials and investigators at 7,000, or just slightly higher than 7,000, and China and Japan sort of left to follow on in that sense.
So I was having a conversation with James Noble, who's the CEO of Adaptimmune, which is sort of in the T-cell receptor space, and he was sort of saying that one of the challenges is actually to find patients for all these clinical trials. I mean, he wasn't necessarily saying that that was a problem for him, but clearly there's going to be it's going to be a bit of a struggle. So have you sort of seen any sort of delays in recruitment pace?
No, I've not heard anything specifically, but obviously, it's going to require more thought. We talked about perhaps targeting people with companion diagnostics for patient selection and things like that. So it's certainly going to be a challenge, and of course, with all these players getting in the space and arguably, looking for those same patients, then potentially that's something they're going to have to be very aware of as they move on. And finally here, just looking at again, we're talking about combo trials with PD-1, PD-L1. I think this really shows how much of a focus this is, and the four kind of big PD-1, PD-L1 here really go for multiple tumor types and also in multiple combinations. So time will tell which of these is going to be successful. Or
right. And again, do we know sort of timeline we're looking at? Is this sort of by 2019, 2020, or even beyond that?
For certainly for a number of the indications at the top, you've already obviously got some approvals in lung, melanoma, and renal. But as you go head and neck and breast and bladder and gastric, you're looking at over the next 3-4 years.
Right. Okay, so I mean, we've talked about it because we mentioned about how Bristol Myers and Merck are kind of in the front, and then we talked about some of the other players and how they're playing sort of catch up. So I guess the sort of the crux of the matter is that if you're late to the game and you can sort of see that this immuno-onc sort of feeding frenzy, what should companies who are late to the game actually be adopting as a strategy?
Yeah, I think it's as we discussed before. If you're going to decide not to bother with the PD-1, PD-L1s, even though obviously some companies still think there will be space, it's finding that thing to combine it with that's going to be the best thing to combine it with. And there's an awful lot of choice. And I mean, one of the beauties of this whole area is its complexity, because it just provides so many different options. It's also a curse because you've got to test all the various combinations together. So companies have to do is find that target and find the evidence, the early stage evidence to support it, and license it out, I think. And big companies coming in, they need to be scouting what's out there and what's going to look good with things that they already have in their pipeline. I think that there has been so many examples of this working. I mean, look at BMS buying Flexus Biosciences just to get its IDO asset. Roche licensed Curadev's IDO assets as well. But there are still other approaches out there, looking at bispecific antibody approaches to improve the response. Also, there's some looking at with suicide switches, so that if the response goes too much, you can stop it. You know, there are different approaches there. There are problems that have been identified. There's problems of low tumor infiltrating lymphocytes in tumors, or some tumors that do have infiltrated lymphocytes, but they still don't respond. So there's the science. There are the scientific problems out there that can be tackled by companies. The other way to get in is to have a potential disruptor, like Selectus, come in with your cured patients. But yeah, I think those are, I don't know which one would be best. But
so, Colin, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, as Alex is sort of recapping there, I mean, you either, with PD-1, PD-L1 set to be the biggest commercial opportunity, you either follow suit and develop PD-1 or PD-L1 inhibitor, or you develop something to go along with it. The other option is you look for potential things that could be, you know, just new technologies. I'm thinking things like Eli Lilly's deal with Immuno-Oncology, looking at their MTAC technology. You're trying to find something that with, you know, another different approach, and or something, as Alex has said, like allogeneic CAR T. So those are really your only options if you're entering into the space at the moment.
Right, right. And as we've already mentioned, ASH is taking place this week. I know that, you know, you guys are going to be all over it, both in terms of, you know, pre-coverage, where already we've put some content out there, reporting from the meeting, and then sort of post. But, you know, can you just sort of give us an idea of, you know, what you're going to be listening out for?
Yeah, well, at ASH this year, this weekend, I should say, we're going to be looking, it's a lot of the data's coming out in relation to CAR T cell therapies, and we'll know more about their efficacy, we'll know more about which companies, you know, in terms of the autologous CD19 directed CAR Ts are in the lead, and we'll be following that data with great interest, because, as I said, it's one of the other most interesting areas in this field.
Okay, great. Well, look, thanks very much, well, to the panel for joining us today, and also to the audience for listening in. As I said at the beginning, if you've got any further questions or comments, please email them to the following address. It's actually on this slide here, but it's pharma@informa.com. Okay, and also finally, what I'd like to do is that I'd like to mention that our next webinar is scheduled for Wednesday, the 27th of January 2016, that is, 4 p.m. GMT, and the title is Dancing with the Devil, Combination Therapies, but at what price? Where again, we're going to go even sort of, you know, deeper into and delve into that space. So the details there on how to sign in are there. And finally, I'd just like to thank Taconic for being our sponsor again for this webinar. And thank you all again, and have a good rest of the day.